Hey everybody, this is Zachary Jeans. Let's keep walking through this Bible. So today is day 251, and as you can tell, I'm a Trailblazers fan, Rip City. We are getting close to the start of training camp, and I'm a little bit stoked about that. Team's going to look totally different. Dame's probably on his way out of town. It almost is certain at this point, but yeah, for those of you that don't follow NBA basketball, none of this means anything. But yeah, pretty stoked. It's getting close. You know, I love football. I watch college football, NFL, but pretty high up on my list is watching the Trailblazers. So, all right. So today is day 251. We are in chapter 5. And today we're going to talk about what can be something that some people just kind of run right on over, right? It's almost like drive-by passage in a way, because it's like it applies to specific people groups, and you might not be in that people group. This passage also gets taught. It gets taught around money. Sometimes we talk about elders and making sure that they're honored and whatnot, overseers. And it deals with being older in the church. And if you're in a young church, you know, there'll be a lot of direction like, hey, honor your elders, and here's the value of elders, and hey, we don't have that many people who are gray hair in our church, but you need to find some, you know, and this and that. And if you go to a church with more people with gray hair, then it's going to be one of those sermons where the pastor is empathetic and tries to relate and value and connect. But then when you get to the stuff here about the younger person, which is somewhat directed at Timothy and those younger in the church, there's a lot of, hey, young whippersnapper, you ought to pay some respect to your elders, and in society we just don't have enough respect. Okay, so that sermon can go that way, right? I'm sure if you've been a believer for any length of time, you've heard both, and a couple others, you know, especially around the money. But I'll do my best to thread the needle on this one, okay? And I hope that God speaks to you. Why don't we do that? Why don't we ask God to speak to us, okay? Lord, I love you. God, please speak to us. God, I don't want to just preach in a pattern. I don't want to teach in a pattern. But I want to honor what you're saying here, specifically for those who are listening and will listen in the future. And God, I want you to teach me, and I want to learn from you. And so I lay all this at your feet. It's in your name I pray, Jesus. God, I love you. Amen. All right. Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for all the love and the likes. I say that every time, but I just want to say thank you again. Appreciate you so much, and thank you for sharing this to your friends and family, or whatever, however you're doing it. Occasionally I see spikes or bumps in my view count over on YouTube especially, and that can only really be because, you know, it got shared or reshared, or a lot of times probably through a text message. So thank you so much. And if you would, keep throwing my name. If you discover one of these, like, hey, we have an online prayer group, or we have a fall prayer group at church, or whatever, would you, even if you don't go there but you just know of it, would you throw my name in, Zachary Jeans, and keep walking and Bible teaching in there, and just let them pray? That's enough. They'll pray for it. They'll pray for me, pray for this ministry, and it will do what God wants it to do, which is, I think, fly. Just keep elevating and flying out farther and farther. Okay. All right. So let me get a sip of coffee here. I think I'm going to start in verse 1, obviously, chapter 5. And I'm going to read... Yeah, I'm going to read to verse 8. Then we'll stop. And then we'll pick it up again in verse 9 and read to verse 16. Stop, talk. And then we'll go 17 to the end of the chapter. Okay? All right. Chapter 5, 1 Timothy. Do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. Honor widows who are truly widows. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household, and to make some return to their parents. For this is pleasing in the sight of God. She who is truly a widow, left all alone, has set her hope on God, and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. Command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for the members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Okay, there's some tricky language in here that gets taken and then multiplied into reality. Some of it's fair, okay? The straightforward reading here is that Paul is talking to Timothy about how he, a young man, empowered by Paul and the church to be a leader, how he should relate to other people, okay? First he starts with ages, and then he talks about genders, and then marriage or the lack thereof, and how he should relate to them, okay? So first and foremost, this isn't, and it's really hard for us not to do this, this is to a young church leader, a young man who's leading the church. So you got to put on that lens, and you got to look at this passage through his eyes. This is Paul instructing him. So if you read this that way, he's like, hey, Timothy, I know you're a young buck, and I just told you to exhort people. It means kind of like tell them what's up. Comes with some admonishing. It comes with all kinds of stuff. It says, hey, we aren't going to squirrel away on that weird, genealogy doctrine thing that you want to do there. Older elder man in the church. We're going to get back to the basics here. And then that older elder man goes, you're disregarding the full teaching of the Bible. And then the younger man, Timothy, has to come back and be like, yeah, but, we're squirreling away on weird stuff, and we got to get back to the basics. So how does Timothy navigate that? How does he deal with people who are older, been believers for decades long? Well, in his case, it wouldn't have been, because maybe there were some believers there in the area that had been believers for a while, but he's not dealing with people that have been believers for 5, 6, 7 decades, right? But to a young Timothy, a young pastor, a young leader in the church, who's been a believer for 5, 10 years and teaching those in his body or in the body that he belongs to that, they've been around for 60 years, 70. They've seen it all. They've gone through 8, 9, 10, 12, 20 pastors in their lives. So who are you coming along to tell them what's up? So Timothy is in this position where Paul is instructing him, hey, you're going to have older folks. This is how you need to deal with them, okay? You need to not rebuke them, okay? Your job isn't to go up and be, you're wrong, old man. That's not how you do it, okay? You want to encourage him as you would a father. So how would you come up, and I'm not talking if you had a bad dad. Yeah, and I say a bad dad, the kind of guy that beat the crap out of you or bawled you out all the time and rode you and or did worse, right? For those of you that suffered sexual stuff, it's the worst. It's just the worst. So I'm not talking about cozying up next to that kind of a dad. Paul's referring to a good dad, good father. So how would you associate yourself to a good father? It would come with respect. Giving the person who raised you the honor and authority in the house, right? What we read earlier, don't attack your parents. So, yeah, you want to honor other older men and women in the congregation as you would older parents, okay, with respect. Younger men as brothers, you come alongside. You don't exert some sort of headship authority. Just kind of come alongside as a brother. Level playing field. And older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, all purity. And this is a little bit harder when it's if you're a pastor or a young guy, early 20s, and you have dealing with ministering to other young women who are about your age, and everybody's single and everybody wants to, get on with life and start having kids and whatnot. There's all this temptation, right? So you gotta act pure with them. If you're in that position as a young man in a church, act pure. Now, how do we? Excuse me. Got some allergens in the air as fall's hitting. Now, how do you apply this? So, if you are an older man or an older woman, how do you relate to a Timothy? Well, don't come at him with, hey, young whippersnapper or young buck. Man, that's irritating. You didn't like it when you were 30. I remember sitting in a Bible study, and this church was edging older and older and older. Although they were starting to capture a little bit younger generations, but it was sliding. It was sliding upwards in age. And a lot of churches do this, and they kind of bring it upon themselves where the older crowd will speak down and use passages like this to sort of bring their authority. And what it does is it just runs off younger couples. Runs off younger couples. I'm talking about people in their late 20s, 30s, even early 40s. It runs them out. So if you're an older person in the church and you're in one of these congregations and all of a sudden the younger couples start disappearing, is it because you're in the men's or women's Bible study and every time somebody in their 30s raises their hand and says something, you see 2 or 3 older people in the group sort of come down on them? Not in a jerk way, but just sort of, well, back in my day. Well, when you get to be my age, that sort of language. Hey, knock it off. You need to knock it off. Because that is not the tone of this passage, right? What you need to do is you need to treat them as young people that are younger than you, but they aren't kids. They aren't children. They're adults. So you need to treat them with that respect, okay? And so with widows and those who are truly widows, the church needs to honor them. Now, this is a contextual thing. A lot of people see the church as an ATM, okay? And, we are using ATMs less and less because everything's digital cash, right? We're less like a Venmo or a PayPal account. The church is not that. The church does receive funds and it puts up teaching and facilities and counseling and all kinds of things, youth programs, groups, Celebrate Recovery, all kinds of opportunities to serve. But the social net, and especially in like a modernized country, this is not a modernized country that Timothy's living in. This is not like where you actually have access to some Social Security and Medicaid, Medicare. This is not a place where you have access to, what we used to call as food stamps back in the day, but, you have access to food benefits. This is not a situation where you have, if you grew up in a certain era, some leftover pension from a spouse that passed away. This is not a situation where any of these social nets exist. Not to mention all the nonprofits, right? And government programs, especially if you're a veteran, that exist. So to go to the church and go, hey, I'm a widow. I pray night and day. I need some help. Well, of course you have the right to go ask for that help. I just think that our churches aren't set up that way anymore. Some do what they can, and we probably should do more. But this passage is more contextually for third world, burgeoning economies, just starting out, industrializing. The church does a lot to help, okay? But it's typically through, parachurch ministries and things like that. Now, those who really need help and those who are like, hey, I need some help. And then you're like, okay, what are you doing with your life? Well, it's none of your business. You're like, well, if it's none of our business, then you get none of our help, If your life and you're in this position of need and you're like pounding boxed wine and you show up once a week for some church thing, maybe, and your life is Netflix, that's not the person that they're describing in here as a widow in need, okay? So, can you earn benefits by your godly behavior? I mean, that's kind of what this implies. But it's basically like, hey, the church has limited resources. Timothy, you got to put them where it counts. And if you got somebody who's literally like a, Yodia or a Syntyche, as he's described in past places, or imagine Aquila dying and her not having anyone left in her life, and Aquila's gone, and Priscilla spent her life serving the church. Well, of course, take care of Priscilla. But if you got somebody going down to the vomitorium, right, and stamping Jesus on their life, in some Roman province, probably not a good one to throw the cash of the church at. Cash in the church is limited. And for those who are just listening to this and are thinking, oh, there's so much money in the church, look at the big, beautiful building and, all the lights and the guitars. And there's, even in big churches, there's not the kind of money you think. Okay? So, the church can do a little bit, but it can't do everything. And I think this verse here is really important. But if anyone doesn't provide for his relatives, and especially for the members of his household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This verse can get stretched out way too far. Okay? What's the context? The context is a widow in need. Because the widow literally does not have any other family in their life. So Timothy, does that widow have family in their life? Okay, well, talk to them. See if that they'll help out and let them know they have an obligation to their family. Right? Okay. So, let a widow be enrolled if she's not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, having a reputation for good works. She's brought up children, has shown hospitality, washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, has devoted herself to good work, but refused to enroll younger widows, for when their passions draw them away from Christ, they desire to marry, so incur condemnation for having abandoned their former faith. Besides that, they learn to be idlers, going about from house to house, not only gossips, but busybodies, saying what they shouldn't. So I'd have younger widows marry, bear children, manage their households, give the adversary no occasion for slander, for some have already strayed after Satan. If any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened so that it may care for those who are truly widows. This is the whole context. And this is where this passage can get extrapolated out, and you can get loafing. There's a Homestar Runner is a internet cartoon from, gosh, it's over 20 years old now, but it's floated around. Maybe you've seen it, but there's this one where it's like no loafing. This reference is for probably like 2 people that are watching this, but the idea is, look, no loafing around. your life once, if you lose your husband and you're in your 20s and you're like, oh, I don't have anybody, I need help. And Paul's like, I've seen this go sideways way too many times. I think you should probably be willing to be married again. You got a whole life ahead of you. And if you're just idle and you're hanging out, talking shop and spreading talk about, this person and that person, who's the new young Timothy pastor seen, and oh, I heard he went over to so-and-so's for dinner. Like all this gossip. Yeah, that's not the life of a godly woman. That's not the life of a godly person in general. And you should look for opportunities, one, with their family to help them. And two, Timothy, you should make sure that you advise them, hey, you should be willing and open the door of your heart again to be married again. If you've gone through divorce, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. But that doesn't mean that your life's over. It doesn't mean that you can't marry again. I know there's some conflicting ideas and concepts here between Paul and Jesus about marrying and not marrying and this and that. But I think the general rule of thumb is it's better to walk in the Lord in a new marriage, in a good, healthy situation, raising some kids and, loving God and doing that, than just sort of hanging out on the church's dime, talking shop, right? Spilling tea. Let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain. And the laborer deserves his wages. Do not admit a charge against an elder except on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. As for those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. In the presence of God and of Christ Jesus and of the elect angels, I charge you to keep these rules without prejudging, doing nothing from partiality. Don't prejudge it. Do not be hasty in laying hands, nor take part in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. No longer drink only water, but use a little wine for the sake of your stomach and your frequent ailments. The sins of some men are conspicuous, plain and obvious, going before them to judgment. But the sins of others appear later. They're hidden. Pretty good at hiding stuff. So also good works are conspicuous, and even those that are not cannot remain hidden. Ultimately, God will see everything. And even in this life, down the road, stuff will come out, right? Good word here. And this is all I'll say about money and eldership. Don't feel guilty about paying your pastor something that is more than just enough to put food on the table. The last thing you want is your church secretary or, your pastor or, youth pastor or whatever worrying about, can I get the air conditioner fixed on the car, and them wrestling with God's Spirit. Oh Lord, I don't deserve air conditioning in my car. Who am I to ask the church to pay me enough money so that, for the 5 months that I live in blazing hot Arizona, I can have air conditioning, because who am I? Don't put your pastor through that crap. It's ridiculous. This is 21st century. Okay? Look, I get it. If you're in a poor church and your pastor is rolling up in a brand new Mercedes, okay, we got issues. Maybe we need to talk to Pastor Tim and ask him to tone it down a bit, okay? I'm not talking about grifting on your congregation. I'm not talking about providing, your pastor, a 16-room mansion in Florida and, a beach house in Costa Rica and, whatever. Make up your combo of things. But they're worth double honor. Don't muzzle the ox while it's treading. That's a reference to, if the ox is doing the work to collect the grain and do all the work that's going to bring in the harvest, let them eat while they're working. They'll probably eat after they're done working too, right? So take care of your pastors, take care of your church, right? Take care of the people doing the work. And if you're in a leadership role, I would encourage you to not make every single person that comes up in the ministry live hand to mouth working 80 hours a week for you and then have to do 25 hours on DoorDash just so that their kids can go to the school where your kids get free tuition. And I'm not speaking about anyone specifically here, but that stuff happens all the time, okay? So if you're telling some young buck, hey, get your master's degree, get your MDiv, which is, by the way, Master's of Divinity is 4 years. A real true Master's of Divinity is 4 years. Most master degrees are 2 years, year and a half, okay, of work. A Master of Divinity, you're asking somebody to pay at minimum $450 a credit right now, probably $600 a credit, maybe $750, depending on the school. Could be more if they go to a really nice seminary. You're asking them to do that for 4 years while they're making essentially something akin to a few dollars more than minimum wage, working and not even getting paid for all the hours they do at the church, right? And then have to go do all their studies, be a good dad, be a good young dad, because they're probably young, have a wife that doesn't be like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this, honey? You know, I'm working full time down at the whatever, you know, and raising our kids and homeschooling them. And, you know, you're serving at the church, and we're a part of the couples group, and we're in pastoral training, and you're going to your Master's of Divinity program, and we're $145,000 in debt, and we're told that we have to buy a home, and 5 years from now, they've walked away, or they stressed out and the enemy took advantage of them. Be good to your people who are doing hard work. It takes a lot of guts to talk and share the gospel, okay? So, God bless you. Keep walking. Take care of the widows in the church if you can. At bare minimum, your church should just have it buttoned up to like, oh, you need help. Okay, cool. Let's walk you through every single process and available program that's out there. Not, well, here's some brochures. Call this number. You should have people, if you're not providing that care, have people that are trained up to, you know, walk them through that process of signing up for their Medicare, Medicaid, getting into a VA home program, getting an inside, you know, line to some housing program or something. You should have that, right? You don't necessarily have the money to take care of widows, but you could do that. And if you're young and you're in the church and you're having to talk to older folks, do it with respect. Don't be a jerk. And if you're older, don't give them the whole, hey, young feller. Don't do that to them. You're going to see your church get really old really fast. And then you're going to be going, where'd all the young people go? All right? All right, say, hey, day 252 tomorrow. Okay, we're finishing up Timothy, chapter 6. God bless you. Keep walking. Bye-bye.